damning and explicit text messages revealed during the David preliminary hearing today, allegedly proving the rising music star had a sexual relationship with 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. On top of the accusations that David killed Celeste, dismembered her body, and disposed of it. It's important to remember that he is also charged with sexual abuse of a child under 14.
A mother walked out of a Los Angeles courtroom yesterday, and you already know why. She couldn't breathe. Her daughter's voice was suddenly filling the room. Not as a case number, not as a collection of remains, but as a living, confused 13-year-old girl.
He was charged with looking at those photos on sheets of printer paper the prosecutor handed him, and then describing verbally for the court what he saw. And Chris, I gotta tell you, there's been a lot of distressing, disturbing, graphic evidence in this case during the preliminary hearing. I think today might have actually been the toughest day for me. I can tell you it was a tough day for the victim's parents. Her mother, Mercedes, who sat through autopsy testimony, who sat through images showing her daughter's remains in the cadaver bags. She walked out of the courtroom during this testimony today. I could hear her holding back, racking sobs. The victim's father walked out behind her. So did their attorney, their wrongful death attorney, Patrick Steinfeld. And I think it's because this is actually the first time during the course of this preliminary hearing where Celeste is being presented as a living human, a young girl who is very much alive, a young girl who has a voice, who is expressing her feelings, her wants, her needs. Before this, she was a bag of decomposing body parts. She was an autopsy subject. She was a collection of limbs that had been severed from each other. But this afternoon, she became human. Again, as we heard about these photos and saw some images that, of course, were not child sexual abuse material that could be shown to the court. We saw Celeste at age 13.
And that changes everything. That's what they don't want you to feel. They want you to see mugshots and chalk outlines, not text messages where a child says she'd do anything to take it back. We're not playing their game today. We're looking at what they buried. Her name is Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She was 14 when she was killed, dismembered, and dumped. But before that, she was a little girl who got a tattoo of a grown man's name on her ring finger. A diamond ring sat on that same finger in photos shown in court. That's not a relationship. That's a trap. And the media spent months selling you a story that Celeste was the one chasing him, the obsessed teenager who wouldn't let go. You and I both know how that narrative works. It protects powerful men. It makes victims look crazy. And look, I need you to stay with me here because the truth that came out in that preliminary hearing flips the entire script. David Anthony Burke, the rising music star known as D4vd's, wasn't some reluctant participant being stalked. He was the aggressor. He was the one pushing for more. Text messages read in court showed him talking about moving in together, getting married, having 2 kids. He called her runaway plan Operation Awesome and told her it would be the most important day of her life. She was 13 years old.
Here's what struck me. Here was my big takeaway walking out of the courtroom today. Previously, we heard the relationship characterized as maybe one-sided, right? It sounded like Celeste, this teenager, was pushing for more, and she was jealous of David's relationships with other women. So the text messages that were read aloud and shown to us in court today actually flip that narrative. That surprised me. I was not expecting that during testimony today. But it sounds like David is actually the one who brought up moving in together, spending more time together, a wedding, again, to this child. She was 13 at the time many of these conversations were documented. Having kids. He states in a text message to Celeste's number that they want 2 kids. And this came out as well. We have previously heard references to abortion and the Plan B morning after pill in their text message exchanges. But today we actually saw messages discussing an abortion appointment for Celeste in January of 2024. Now, do the math there. Her birthday was September of 2010. She was 13 when this purported abortion took place. Where we just wrapped court this afternoon, we were looking at text messages where Celeste is now expressing regret, telling David over text that she would do anything to take that back.
And here's the thing, though. The prosecution showed these messages one after another. You know, just like I know that when the powerful get exposed, the system starts looking for escape hatches. But these texts, pulled straight from iCloud's server, stamped and undeniable, don't leave much room. LAPD Detective Corey Fell walked the court through printed descriptions of photos because the actual images are child sexual abuse material. The kind of evidence that doesn't just suggest a crime, it screams it. He described dozens of explicit photos of David and this child, and during that testimony, something cracked. David, who'd been stoned, faced through autopsy photos of the girl he supposedly cared about, started fidgeting. His leg bounced. He hunched over and scribbled notes for the first time all week. He shrunk in his seat. Not when they talked about her liver being pierced. Not when they described her remains in a cadaver bag. When his own private pictures were exposed. That tells you everything. He didn't mourn her. He mourned his mask slipping.
This was interesting, too. This was actually the first instance, Chris, during this preliminary hearing where it seemed to me like David was actively engaged in his own defense. Today was the first time I actually noticed him using the pen or pencil in front of him and that yellow legal notepad that I keep on peeking at, trying to see if he's taking any notes. Before today, I haven't seen him writing anything down, and I've got an eye on him at all times just to see how he's reacting to what's being said about him, his actions. Nothing before today, not a single thing written down. But today, as they were talking about the photos found on his phone and the text messages recovered from his iCloud account, I did notice him hunching over and starting to jot something down. I did notice him having whispered conversations with his attorneys. At one point, this was when, and this was really tough. This was actually what prompted the victim's mother to start crying and both of her parents to walk out of the courtroom, flanked by their attorney. But when they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure a little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked down at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down. And I'm really curious what he wrote down. Really curious what he shared with his attorneys during that exchange, because it wasn't just one photo or two that LAPD Detective Corey Farrell described on the stand. It was a series of photos, probably dozens. You know, it got to a point where there were so many descriptions. They were so explicit. You can see in my notes, Chris, I actually stopped describing them one by one. And I just started grouping them into categories, you know, of genitalia.
Actually, wait. Let me back up to something that made the victim's parents walk out. The mother, Mercedes, had already sat through images of her daughter's dismembered body. She stayed for that. But when the court started hearing Celeste's own words, the sound of her daughter's regret over an abortion, she'd been pressured into at 13. That broke her. That's the part the news glosses over. Celeste texted David that it was his child. January 2024, she was 13 and he had her at an abortion appointment. Do the math. Do the math and then tell me this was just a troubled teen with a crush. And just a few weeks later, this adult, was on body camera footage eating chips, acting like he barely knew her when police came looking. We all saw that video. We all knew it was a performance.
You know, just looking at the timeline here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because January of 2024, they're talking about this abortion appointment. And then I keep going back to that body cam that you described from February of 2024 when she was missing. Police go to her house and he's almost acting as if like he doesn't really know who she is. You know, he's eating some chips. He's very casual about it. And it just, you know, for as much as there's this kind of now dynamic we understand of the relationship through the text messages, I think it makes that body cam video look way more damning and kind of shows just how much he was allegedly misleading police at that point in time and acting like he didn't really know who she was, when clearly these text messages show that this relationship was at a very serious level.
Absolutely, Chris. I think it also paints a great picture of just how convincing David can be as a liar. Because when that body cam recording was taken in February of 2024, that's also the time period where we saw text message conversations today in court showing that David and Celeste were talking about something called OA, Operation Awesome, where they were plotting her departure, her runaway from her home in Lake Elsinore. And this struck me too. David appears to be the one pushing this. He's the one who keeps on asking her, do you have your bags packed? He tells her, bring everything you're going to use that I can immediately replace. You know, bring a bigger bag. Do you have everything packed? Are you ready to go? In one of these messages from that particular exchange.
Now here's where it gets interesting. The defense has been aggressive all week, poking holes in DNA, questioning the handling of remains. But when this digital evidence hit, they went quiet. Barely an objection. Blair Burke and Marilyn Bednarski, sharp attorneys, just let the detective keep talking. That silence is louder than any cross-examination. It tells me the evidence on that felony count, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, is ironclad. You don't stay silent when you can fight. You stay silent when fighting makes it worse.
I was surprised by this, too. There were not very many objections lodged by Blair Burke and Marilyn Bednarski during this portion of testimony today, as we were hearing about and seeing this digital evidence. And, you know, prior to today, they've had a sharp line of questioning. They've had objections. They've had active defense, active strategy in response to just about everything. The fact that they could find gaps in DNA evidence yesterday, right? I wasn't expecting them to just let this LAPD detective go on and continue describing those photos, but that's exactly what they did. And that tells me this is hard, irrefutable evidence, at least in regard to that one felony count, continual sexual abuse of a child under 14.
But wait, because there's a moment from the autopsy that the system is going to try to twist. Dr. Grant Ho, the deputy medical examiner, testified about penetrating wounds that killed Celeste. He mentioned that one wound could have been caused by a gunshot, though he clarified he wasn't saying that the defense jumped. The defense jumped. They asked if the victim might have been holding the knife herself, and several people in that courtroom exchanged looks because it bordered on absurd. Yet that's the playbook. Blame the dead girl. Confuse the jury. Make you doubt what's right in front of you. They did the same with the dismemberment, pointing out Dr. Ho was a fellow at the time, had a trainee with him. They'll try to make you think the medical examiner's office was sloppy, that the investigation was rushed, that maybe, just maybe, this 14-year-old orchestrated her own horrific end. I need you to pause with me for just a second. Imagine being a parent listening to that. Imagine your child being described not as a victim, but as a potential suspect in her own murder, because her body was too decomposed to prove otherwise. That's not justice. That's a strategy.
So he painted a very clear picture of what happened to this 14-year-old. Now, here's what the defense did with that. It was Marilyn Bednarski leading cross-examination of Dr. Grant Ho this morning. She made it very clear. You may have these findings. You may have this autopsy report. You may have these shocking visuals, but you don't actually know for sure what kind of sharp instrument was used. You don't actually know for sure which penetrating wound occurred first. You don't know for sure if they happened seconds apart. And then defense actually insinuated today during cross-examination of this witness that they don't know for sure if the victim herself may have been holding the knife that stabbed her. There were a couple looks exchanged in the courtroom after Bednarski said that. And after the witness did in fact confirm that no, he does not know due to the advanced state of decomposition of the victim's remains. But everybody looked around, and I think that bordered on absurd to a couple of the people in the courtroom I spoke with during the lunch break.
I've covered a lot of cases. This one, though, it's sitting in my chest like a rock. I can't shake the feeling that we're watching something evil being smoothed over, packaged for trial, while a little girl's voice is reduced to legal arguments. Celeste wasn't pushing for more in those final texts. She told David she was okay staying friends. She didn't want to be connected online. She wasn't interested in sex without a label.
And just because I'm looking at the notes here that you sent over today, and this was right before court ended, kind of talking about the dynamic of this relationship, because it had been presented, at least to me at this point, that, you know, this was so one-sided. Celeste was jealous of whoever David was seeing, right? And the reason that he allegedly killed her was because she was going to expose everything. And the text you have here, this is from March 2025. So this is roughly a month, maybe 2 months before she passes away. And Celeste appears to be the one trying to move on post-breakup. She says she is okay with staying friends, but she doesn't want to be connected online. She isn't interested in continuing to have sex with him. And the quote from that text is "without a label," which sounds way more of a casual, kind of level-headed approach to their situation as to what maybe we thought ahead of time.
She was trying to move on. And that, I believe, sealed her fate, because abusers don't let go, especially when they've got everything to lose. And the reason for that, well, you'll see. The breadcrumb that keeps me up is this. In February 2024, while David was playing dumb for the cops, he was texting Celeste about Operation Awesome. Her getaway, he was telling her to pack a bigger bag, to bring everything she couldn't replace. The most important day of her life, he called it. What did he have planned? We don't know. The evidence stops where her life does. But the questions don't. Why did he want her to disappear? Why was he so calm when officers showed up? Why are we only now hearing about these messages after months of a very different story being fed to us? This isn't just about one predator. It's about a machine that protects rising stars. The same media that now reports these texts was perfectly comfortable framing Celeste as a lovesick stalker just weeks ago. You remember that? You saw the headlines. And we're supposed to trust the system to handle this. The same system that let a 13-year-old get tattooed, impregnated, and dismembered without anyone noticing until she was in a bag. They want us to believe it's all under control, that a preliminary hearing will sort it out. But just like I know that the powerful have escape routes the rest of us never see. Celeste Rivas Hernandez is the hero in this story, whether the news says it or not. She didn't get a platform. She got silenced. She didn't get protection. She got buried. Her words, her hesitation, her attempt to step back from him, those are acts of resistance from a child who was in way over her head. And now those words are evidence. They're the only thing cutting through the defense's fog. She named her abuser. She showed us the ring, the tattoo, the Operation Awesome plot. She told us she wished she could take back the abortion. She may not have known she was building a case file, but she did. So here's where we end. Not with resolution, not with a tidy conviction we haven't gotten yet. We end with open anger. Because Monday morning, that courtroom opens again. The cross-examination of the digital evidence detective begins.
Here we are. It's on Friday. We weren't sure if this was going to continue on into next week, but court is going to begin 9:15 in the morning Pacific time on Monday. Any expectation about what's going to happen Monday and how long this could go for?
I thought they were going to call another witness. It sounds like LAPD Detective Corey Farrell might actually be the final witness for the prosecution. So they now hand this witness off to defense to cross-examine. When they're done doing their cross-examination, there may be redirect from the prosecution. There may be some recross. After that, I don't know yet. I can't tell you how defense attorneys are going to handle this evidence from the phones. I don't know what they're going to do with these very graphic photos and these very explicit text messages. I can tell you this, though. They don't say anything just yet about the actual killing of Celeste. They only speak to the nature of the relationship between the victim and the defendant before she died.
And I want you to ask yourself one question. If a 13-year-old's texts, her body, her autopsy photos aren't enough to lock this man away for good, what hope do any of our children have? What gets buried next? Tell me what you think. I read the comments. We're building a community here that sees through the noise. Don't stay quiet, because if we don't demand answers, nobody will.